What's good, y'all? Today I have Ty Collins, one of my good friends. I've known this guy almost a decade at this point. Why? Because he came down to my university and is a member of my illustrious organization, Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. And we are proud to have him on today because he's going to be dropping down a whole bunch of knowledge that's going to allow you to know how to level up. And we're looking forward to figuring out how he got into the position in which he's currently in today, exactly mapping out exactly what it is that you're going to have to do to get to where he is as well. And we're also going to pick through some of the information that may be in his brain that we just need to know anyways. And so with that, let's get straight to it and let's do our checks and balances to ensure that he is a viable person. Of course, I did it in advance, but we got to ask on camera. How do you feel about your job, man?
So first off, I appreciate the opportunity to be joining you today. Thanks for the invitation. My job is legit. I love my job. I get to do all things that I want to do and have the freedom to explore the ideas and concepts that I want to explore and really support people along their journeys and their development. So I really enjoy my job. I love what I do.
Perfect. And that's very, very important for our audience to know, because at the end of the day, we cannot continue to allow and to push positions that people are going to wake up on Monday and despise. We need people to know that when they're going to get to work with doing whatever it is professionally they desire, that they're enjoying their life, because there is no separation between life and work, regardless if you want it to be or not. Those hours are a part of your 24 each day. And so with that, man, what was the first profession that you actually remember wanting to have as a youth?
So as a youth, I read Gifted Hands by Ben Carson. So I wanted to be Ben Carson growing up, which is interesting how your heroes like fall before your eyes when you learn who they really are. But I wanted to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. After reading his stories, I identified a lot with the story in terms of having a single mother and being from that type of background. So I really wanted to go into medicine growing up.
Well, let's say this. I don't know how much he failed opposed to the reality of him not necessarily staying in the perfect lane of his expertise. Because although you are Dr. Ty Collins, it probably wouldn't be best for me to ask you about things going on that a meteorologist would know. Just think, or even though you're Dr. Ty Collins, you can't tell me any of the things that he would know that made him famous and an expert, and why you loved what he wrote in that book as well as what he did in that book. So that might be the catch here. He's still a person of significance in his area of expertise. How we feel about the other decisions, that's a political conversation that we ain't got to have here today, but I understand what you're getting at. So with that though, okay, so that's wild, because I can absolutely see that, because knowing you at this point, I mean, you're a doctor, doesn't matter what you got your doctorate in, it wasn't an easy feat, and the process was, I'm certain, a tedious process that required you to go above and beyond your current thoughts in order to see in advance for whatever your potential study was going to be. So for that reason, what stopped you, man? Because I mean, obviously you have a brilliant mind. So what stopped you from going that direction? Because frankly, let's be honest, I know you're being paid and compensated in a way that is fair, something that you enjoy, which is also required for this whole thing. But you obviously could have got paid more if you would have went off and became, as a neurosurgeon, right?
Yeah, neurosurgeon.
Yeah, a brain surgeon. It would have been brain surgery.
Right. So I'm from New Orleans. I went to undergrad at Loyola University in New Orleans, and like everyone from New Orleans, it goes back to Hurricane Katrina, right? So it's my Katrina story. So Katrina happened the day that my sophomore year was supposed to start. I was a bio pre-med major at that point. And so Katrina happened. I went to LSU for that semester and came back and started to do a lot of tutoring and mentoring in schools with my wonderful fraternity, Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. as well as other community organizations. So when I came back after Katrina, I really wanted to support youth in the city, and I got really involved in tutoring in schools. And so then I got really interested in discipline issues and issues between teachers and students, and how students support each other and all those types of things. So I really switched at that point. You know, those types of traumas really make you rethink what you're doing in your life and why you're doing it in general. And so really I saw the path that I ultimately chose as a great way to support the students and support the youth. And so I decided to switch over to psychology.
Wow. I was 15 when Katrina hit. And the reason I know that's because the Junior Olympics happened and it was in Katrina that year. And I was down there. I was there the week before Katrina hit, which is absolutely crazy. We stayed in a location in the quarters. I have an image of that from the last time I was down there. I was down there 2 other times in the past years. And I finally bumped into the place that I stayed. And I was very surprised to see it still existed. But the stores and things that surrounded it shifted. It's still the Bourbon Street is still Bourbon Street, and the quarters is still the quarters. And I gotta say, I love all the food that they have in New Orleans, which is one of the #1 reasons I look forward to coming down there. It's a restaurant that I'm just like, I genuinely want to go down there to New Orleans 100% just to go to this restaurant and get this food. Oh my goodness. I would be lying to you to act like I remember the name of it, but no one could tell me that I don't know. I know exactly how to get there. I don't know the name, but it's this, I want to say it's this jambalaya pasta. Holy Jeebus. That thing is like talking to God himself or herself. Nonetheless. Okay. That's really interesting. So I never asked this question, but it sounds like you stayed home for school. Why? Why didn't you?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't want to leave New Orleans. I think people are, when you're from New Orleans, you just have, it's just part of your identity, it's just who you are. So I wasn't really wanting to leave New Orleans. I got a good scholarship from Loyola, got a full tuition scholarship. So it was really a pretty easy decision to go ahead and stick around in New Orleans. I did look at other universities, but I really appreciated kind of the Jesuit focus and kind of critical thinking and social justice and all those types of things that were a part of the university. So I really thought it would be a good place for me to go. It also had, it was a smaller university with smaller class sizes and more support. So thought it would be a great place to start my career.
Okay. Last question before I finally allow everyone to know exactly what your title is and what it means is, what's up with the fact that I have literally never heard an accent from you ever? What is that about?
I don't know what it is, but I don't have an accent. My sister and my mother have very clear New Orleans accents. Like they sound like they're straight from New Orleans, but I do not. I don't know what happened. I didn't get that magic, unfortunately.
All right, I just had to ask because I'm like, I think as we started getting me excited about New Orleans, I'm like, I don't think I've ever heard my guy's accent a single time that we've ever spoken, especially earlier on when you probably were at least close enough to still have the accent to New Orleans. So, all right, go ahead and allow our audience to know exactly what your title is and what it actually means.
Sure. So I am an associate professor and coordinator of the school psychology program at the University of Cincinnati. So I am a faculty member in the program. I do research, I teach courses as well as do service for the university and the profession. And I also have an administrative role in terms of running the program. So I run the faculty meetings, and that actually just started this semester. So I'm brand new coordinator during crazy COVID times, but it includes everything from running faculty meetings as well as things about the program website, accreditation issues, student issues, coordinating our admissions, and all those types of things. So I'm a faculty member at UC in the school psych program, and I'm currently coordinating the program.
Okay. Okay. Do me a favor for everyone who does not know.
Mm-hmm.
What is the, I know the answer. What is the difference between a person who teaches at the university
Mm-hmm.
and the professor who teaches at the university?
Sure. So there are different types of teaching positions at the university. So one piece is when you are hired as a full-time faculty member, there are different levels. So you're first hired as an assistant professor, and then you get promoted to associate professor. And that typically involves having tenure, and we could talk about that, what that looks like as well. And then there's finally professor. But then outside of full-time faculty, we have a number of adjunct faculty and other types of faculty positions. So you might be a person in your industry and you might teach one graduate course a semester or kind of teach a one-off course here or there. Or you could teach a couple courses and be an adjunct faculty member, which means that you're not a full-time faculty member, but you're teaching courses for different programs.
Okay. And which category does the person who has their PhD fall under?
They could be either. So you could, for example, you could have a full-time job as an engineer, right? And also be an adjunct faculty member teaching a course for an engineering program at a university. So and it could be the opposite way where you could have a in terms of getting a full-time faculty position, you have to have whatever the terminal degree is in that field most often. So if in that field, like fine arts, for example, the master's might be the terminal degree. So you just need to have that degree in order to secure a position. Whereas in other fields, the doctorate, whatever the doctorate looks like, would be the terminal degree in that field.
Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And let's get to one of the controversial things of your profession and you being who you are. I've never heard you do it a single time, and I do apologize genuinely in advance for having not introduced you correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just did actually, because I realized that the way I did today doesn't matter, because the way I did today as the actual intro is what you'll see anyways.
Gotcha.
TV magic. Anyways, what I'm getting at is the fact that when it comes to a professor, because I've been checked by many of you all when I've slipped up in many conversations, it's doctor.
Mm-hmm.
It's doctor. Can you really break down the significance of correcting people when they say Mr. Collins opposed to Dr. Collins? Because I understand, I respect it. It's a slip up. It's just a Freudian slip. It's my bad. But nonetheless, go ahead.
So I think a lot of that has to do with cultural things when you achieve that level in terms of becoming a doctor. So part of it is I'm much more likely to say something if I feel like someone is disrespecting me or not treating me as if I have a PhD, right? Versus in normal conversation. So I'm personally not the type, even though I come from the South, where that is a big deal. You call everybody doctor, whoever. In my program, it's a graduate program. And so our program culture is that our students call us by our first name. So I rarely get called Dr. Collins. In general, it's kind of weird to even hear it sometimes because it rarely happens. So I'm kind of a little bit of a different situation in terms of that. So, but when I do see, like when I hear like Mr. Collins, like it's like a little sting there. It's like, no, it's Dr. Collins. But I'm also very humble. So I'm also just like, I'm a pretty chill guy. So I rarely correct people unless I feel like there's some issue there where you're not understanding or respecting kind of the level that I've achieved at that point. I think a lot of times minoritized folks, women, people who hold identities that might not be as respected in different spaces might be more likely to assert that doctorate that they have earned, especially in situations where they don't feel like they're being respected.
Ooh-wee. That was a loaded statement for me to hear, not because it probably actually was, but as a person who, I mean, you know what my master's is in. It's funny when certain conversations come up, and say if I'm talking to you and I mean, I'm not an expert in your degree. In fact, I just got my major. That was my major, so that's my bachelor's, which obviously does not give me any deference over you in that conversation. So, how does it make you feel? I'm certain it has happened where someone's talking to you about depression or anxiety or, man, I think such as bipolar, and they're just going off of some past experiences they've had with such and such who had it, and they're diagnosing this person that probably might be having a bad day or whatever. And as you're talking to them, like, hey, it's not, and they continue to talk, and it's like, you gotta understand, see, I'm not talking about my opinion here. You're talking about an opinion. I'm giving you research that I've done. So how often does that happen, and how do you keep that under control? Because I'll be honest, the conversation about race and a lot of those things that I had to study in grad school, when I start talking certain topics, it's like, I wasn't actually asking you. No disrespect, but I wasn't asking when I said what I said.
Right. I think for me, it's if it's within my realm of expertise, I will definitely check people on things. So if it's about social justice or race or how, Black and brown kids are treated in schools and all those types of things that I know a lot about and am passionate about and have expertise in, I would definitely be more assertive in terms of, talking to folks about that and making sure that they understand those types of things. Anything around race or intersectionality or critical race theory and all those types of things, I would definitely be more likely to discuss. If it's something around anxiety or depression that they read in a magazine or saw on a website or something like that, it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I know that, psychology is really a field where a lot of people have some knowledge about it versus like, neurosurgery, right? So a lot of people are much more likely to talk about these things and have more experience themselves with it. And more kind of layman's knowledge about it. So it kind of happens all the time. But if it's about, race or, discipline issues in schools or like the things that I am very passionate about and knowledgeable about, I'll definitely talk with folks more about it to make sure they're on the right page.
Okay. I had to ask because, I mean, let's be clear. We're not saying that everything we say is going to be correct, but we are saying that when we decide to talk on the actual level of our expertise and our understanding, we can go back and give you resources. We can cite sources. We're not going to just say research shows. We can say that, but we can say research shows and then say the title of the article or the actual author behind it, so you can go do that, opposed to you just saying, the Times says. The Times? Word? Okay. Your Uncle Pookie said that?
Right. And in some cases, like I could cite my own stuff that I have been the person to write, right? So it's an issue of like, this is something that I know and that I know very well. So respect that. You can of course have your opinion on whatever it is, but respect what the facts are, and then you can create your opinion from there.
Okay. So since you mentioned that, and I know this is getting out of order, but it will be added into the actual story at some point. Sure. Can you tell me, what was your dissertation in? What was your study?
Sure, that was great. So my dissertation was on what we call peer-mediated check and check out. So there is a mentoring program or a mentoring intervention called check and check out, where students meet with the mentor at the beginning of the day, and then their teacher fills out a form based on their behavior during the day, and then at the end of the day they check out with their mentor. So they'll have like a goal of how many points they're supposed to get on their form, and if they get the goal, if they have good behavior during the day according to their teacher, then they'll get a reward, and if not, they'll try again the next day. So that's a pretty strong evidence-based intervention. What my dissertation was on was, instead of meeting with an adult mentor, which is what typically would happen in schools, my dissertation was about meeting with another peer, with another student who could check in and check out with you. So having kind of more of a peer mentoring model rather than an adult mentoring model in that situation. It was specifically with Black students in urban schools, so very much about kind of from that critical race theory of building scholars and communities of scholars where they're supporting each other rather than focusing on teachers who oftentimes don't look like them, supporting them, having their peers who are similarly acculturated help out with them in terms of being a mentor and modeling and providing support for them, improving their behavior. So that was what my dissertation was on.
Okay, so two things.
Mm-hmm.
I want to find out, I guess, briefly, I would love to know what was the actual findings of that research. And the second thing is, and you might say this one first, for everyone that heard you say the teachers may not look like them, and for anybody who may feel a type of way, can you articulate the significance of that statement? Because it doesn't escape me, but for many people, they just hear people always say that, and they don't comprehend the real significance behind it. It's not a simply being prejudiced thing. It's just the reality of a story that you're about to break down for them.
Sure. So if we look at the demographics of the teacher workforce, the special education teacher workforce, as well as principals, school psychologists, which is my field, speech language pathologists, et cetera, they are very often white, monolingual, English speaking, middle class women, right? Who are making up this workforce of folks who are supporting students who are a growingly diverse group of students from different countries with different languages and different needs, et cetera. So those are just facts that the population of students is becoming more and more diverse, and the population of teachers, school psychologists, principals is becoming more diverse, but at much slower rates. So we know that schools are very much segregated in terms of the teacher workforce and the student workforce, or in the student population. And even within the student population, we know that schools are still very much segregated more than, decades and decades after Brown versus Board of Education. We know that white students are much more likely to go to schools that are majority white, and that students of color are much more likely to go to schools that are majority students of color, and that there's very little in terms of actual integration of schools to this day. And so we know that most often you're going to have a teacher, if you are a Black or brown student, you're going to have a teacher who does not look like you. That's what the data would support in terms of that. So that doesn't mean that a teacher who looks like you would be more relevant for you or would be more culturally appropriate. Everybody needs to work on their cultural relevance and cultural competence, right? But there are specific issues that can come about when you don't share identities with the folks who are teaching you in that situation.
So I think
in terms of the
wait.
findings.
Hold on. Because I still want to stay there for a second, and then we get to the findings. Many people have heard the term implicit bias. So outside of the conversation of implicit bias, where a person may have bias and may not be intentional, I'm letting the audience know this. When a person has a bias towards a group of people or something, and it may not necessarily be intentional, it could be inherent just based off of the cultural norms that have built up within you, that actually creates habits and reactions that you don't even realize is coming out and causes one thing or one person to be chosen over the other or favored over the other. There's a great test, I think it's Harvard, but it's called the IAT test that'll show you this. And I know the research shows, that even Blacks, unfortunately, due to socialization in this country, tend to be a little bit biased against ourselves. We may score closer to favoring us than other groups, but unfortunately, due to just how the country has created this image and we see it, and depending on the music, entertainment that we consume, we may have participated in as well, but it may not, it's clearly not true. It's just an aspect like every community has. So do me a favor, and can you be clear? I just wanted to say that outside of implicit bias, can you explain some of the other significant factors that come with having somebody speak to you or try to connect with you or even teach you that doesn't look like you?
Sure. So there are lots of outcomes that are not equitable for minoritized students in schools. So for example, Black, Indigenous, and Latinx children are much more likely than white and Asian children to be suspended, to be expelled, to be placed in special education for emotional disturbance and for specific learning disabilities. They're much more likely to be placed in alternative schools than in regular schools, for example. And even within, if you're looking at things like suspension, white students are much more likely to be suspended for clear offenses like vandalism or smoking, whereas Black, Latinx, Indigenous students much more likely to be suspended for things that are pretty subjective, like disrespect or threatening, right? So there's been decades of research showing that there are these kind of disproportionate treatment of minoritized students in schools. There's a lot of recent research looking at adultification. So a lot of that work has been focused on Black boys, for example. So we know that Black boys, especially Black high school age boys with disabilities, are most likely than any other group in schools to be suspended. But there's much more work happening on Black girls now, looking at the adultification of Black girls in schools and how they are viewed and how they are treated by the adults in their schools. So, and this is kind of where that implicit bias comes in, where Black girls are viewed as more mature than other girls or than boys, but they are also not given the respect of someone who is more mature than other girls and boys. So it's this idea where they're kind of in this middle where they are adultified and treated as older, but not given that respect. And so now we're seeing a lot of issues with discipline issues, with treatment and inappropriate and quite frankly racist treatment of Black girls in schools, and their outcomes are really suffering because of those types of biases. So these biases are real. We know that teachers' expectations for Black and Indigenous and Latinx students are very different than their expectations for white and Asian students. We know that white and Asian students have much higher rates of AP classes and college prep classes and all these types of things, much higher rates of being evaluated and placed into gifted programming and gifted gifted programming in general versus other students. So there are real clear structural issues that happen in schools around race, around gender, around other intersectional identities that really need to be addressed. And some of my work definitely attempts to address some of those issues.
Okay.
I don't know if that was too much, but.
No, that was perfect, man. That was perfect. It's really interesting and ironic because, you know, the quote that people love to say, Black don't crack. But the irony is the fact that when we're younger, we're perceived as older. And when we get older, we're treated sometimes as if we're younger. And whether or not that's you being perceived as young or you're just frankly being treated as young, which is why, yeah, people talk about the N-word, but in our community, based off of history, somebody that's not Black, or more specifically, if I'm in the South and you're white and you say, hey, boy, come here. It's like, hold on, I'm a 32-year-old man. Like, time out on that one. No, we're not going to do that. But that's where it's really intriguing to hear your perspective and your feedback because of the fact that it flips itself on the head, and I don't think I ever realized. So we'll go ahead and break down exactly what your research showed. Run it back.
Yeah, so
the research was because we have been just going on for a while about other things.
Yes. So again, it was looking at the peer-mediated mentoring program, Check In, Check Out. And I actually did two different studies. One was looking at a student who had social skills difficulties and pairing them with a popular student in their classroom who had great social skills. And that we saw was very effective. That study was published in a journal. It was pretty effective. We also did a second study where I had two pairs of students who both had social skills deficits. So can we pair two students together who both have social skills deficits to support each other? And we found mixed results with that one. So one pair they were both Black boys, and they kind of created a competition among themselves. So they're like, your goal is 20 points, but I'm going to get 23 points. So they were very much built rapport with each other and create a relationship whereas the other pair, there was a Middle Eastern boy and a Black girl, and they just did not click at all. They did not want to meet with each other. And so that group, although they had better outcomes, it was much less than the group of the two boys who really supported each other and worked with each other. So really will lead to future research really looking at how do we pair students and how do we pick students to work with each other. Should they be from similar groups? Should they be similar gender or similar backgrounds and all those types of things? So that was what that work is. And since then, I've done quite a bit of research around peer-mediated interventions in general. So other types of interventions where we involve other students to support each other in school. So again, limiting the focus on teachers implementing everything, one from that cultural responsiveness kind of social justice standpoint, but also from an efficiency standpoint. So teachers have a lot to do in schools. So if we can utilize students to support each other, that can be a really great way to go. And so my research since then has really focused on those peer-mediated interventions for Black students in urban schools. So how can we set things up for them to encourage each other to engage in appropriate behavior? And how can we use peer influence in a positive way so that they can support each other and again, building those communities of scholars from that critical race theory perspective.
Okay, okay. So, what is the way, or better yet, how do you all tend to get this type of research to become school policy? Like, how do you convert thoughts into a reality? Great that you did that research. And I ask this because that was one of the things that frustrated me with while I was getting my master's in sociology. The fact that you can't contaminate the environment. And I'm like, no. I'm going to get all this information and then I'm going to completely contaminate this environment because this environment needs to change. That's why you've been researching it about the exact same thing this whole dang time. I don't need emotions and Philly stuff. We can get all this content and then let's apply it, please. So how do we put your actual research into application?
That's great. So part of it is my research specifically is applied. So it's working with real kids in real schools. So it's important when you're writing up that work that you really talk through what the intervention is, what it looks like, how to make those decisions so that folks can take it and actually use it. And it's good in my field and in lots of other fields, there are journals that are more research focused. And then there are journals that are more practitioner focused. So one of the things that I've done is kind of run a study or have a student do a dissertation, for example, and write one paper for the researchy journal that is, all great and perfect and methodologically rigorous and stuff, but then also write a second paper that really breaks down the steps so that a practitioner could take it and use it. So what you're talking about, we call it kind of a research to practice gap, where you can do all this great research, but actually how do we do it in school? So part of it is coming up with ideas and interventions and supports that can be done in schools, and really as part of the research, collecting data from the people who are implementing the interventions or receiving the interventions to say, is this something that's feasible? Could you continue to do this? Did you continue to do it after we wrapped up our data collection? From a student perspective, is this something I would want to continue helping? Would I want to keep meeting with my buddy, or am I kind of done because of the study's over, right? So collecting data during the process and really thinking about the feasibility of the work that you're proposing at the beginning stages. And while you're doing it, kind of collecting data from folks who are implementing the interventions so that you can develop things that can actually be done in real life. And then there's, other parts of it, including like being on Twitter and promoting the research that you're doing, right? I have a lot of practitioners who follow research Twitter accounts and other students and graduate programs who follow those accounts. So it's really important to publicize the work that you're doing and make sure that it's getting to people and getting into people's hands. The other piece, so there's conducting applied research that can actually be feasible, there's publicizing it, and then there's the work of consulting and collaborating with school districts to actually get these things implemented, doing talks and being invited for things, having grants, having contracts, those types of things, where you're actually seeing that work being implemented in schools and helping to support the actual implementation of that work.
Okay. Well, go ahead, man. We done dove deep into so many different elements of your profession. Go ahead and let's see exactly what the path looked like for you, and if there is an easier path for others, or if you did anything difficult, or if you did take the easier route, let us know. So especially if there was something in your path that was non-traditional.
Sure. So the path for me was 4 years of undergrad. So as I said, I started as a bio pre-med major and switched over to psychology. So I completed my bachelor's in psychology, and then I went straight into the doctoral program at Louisiana State University. So in school psychology, that's typically a 5-year doctoral program. So that's a really important piece to think about when you're going from undergrad to your graduate school program. You'll have to decide whether you want to get some experience first and kind of go out into the field and do some things before going to graduate school, or whether you want to go straight to graduate school. For me, I wanted to just kind of keep going and not start making money and then have to come back and be broke again, right? So I was like, let's just keep going through and go to graduate school immediately from undergrad. So that's something you have to think about. Again, as a faculty member, you have to have that. In most cases, you have to have the terminal degree, so you're going to have to go to graduate school at some point. So my graduate program was 5 years, as many of the school psychology PhD programs are. And so that included coursework, that included doing practical experiences in schools and clinics and other settings. And then my 5th year was a internship, a full year internship in a school district. I did the whole, it's called the APIC match process. It's similar to medical school, where I matched to Fort Worth, Texas. So I was at Fort Worth Independent School District for that year, where I had that full year internship experience. And then at that point in psychology, you really have to think about, are you going to, if you're interested in a faculty position, are you going to go straight into a faculty position, or are you going to work in the field, or are you going to do what's called a postdoc or a postdoctoral fellowship in order to get more experience and get your license? So that's another kind of path that you have to kind of think about, another way that could fork into different areas. My decision was to go straight to my faculty position. So I was on the market in terms of securing a faculty position during the year that I was on internship. And I secured the job at UC, which was very similar. The program is very similar to my program at LSU. They're both very behavioral programs, and so it was a great fit for lots of reasons, including my awesome colleagues. And so I graduated in 2013, in August of 2013, and started at UC that year. And I've been at UC ever since. So that was kind of my path. I did the straight path from undergrad to graduate school straight to a faculty position. And at each of those points, you can kind of veer off and do different things. And people have done it in lots of different ways. So for example, there are folks who complete their doctorate and then go work as a school psychologist for years, and then at some point decide they want to pursue a faculty position and then apply to be a faculty member. So that's definitely a route, and there are kind of pros and cons to each of those ways.
Okay, and was the internship paid?
Yes, the internship was paid.
How much?
It was $32,000, I believe.
And you were still in school when you did that internship?
Yeah, it was the 5th year. We have
5th year of grad school.
Of graduate school, yeah, of my doctoral studies, yes. So most times, well, when they're done correctly, internships should be paid because you're doing a lot of work. You're actually an employee of the district. So my program at LSU and our program here at UC requires that internship is a paid position, because it is another full year of training. So yes, it was a paid position.
Okay. And that's really interesting because $30-something thousand, yeah, when you come out of college, that may not be glorious money. But I understand because, as I always stress, I came out with 30, so it was pretty much nothing. 31, and I felt every lick of it. But you were still in school, so that's different. It probably felt like a lot of money for you at that time compared to somebody who was out there without having to focus on school at the same time. So, tell me this: what can you do if you decide to not just focus on tenure? Well, you are tenured now, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So if you were still to want to leave, which I don't know if that's a good decision after you get tenure, but nonetheless, if you were to be like, you know what, I'm tired of doing this whole faculty thing, I want to go out into the world and put in some work. What are your options?
So the options are absolutely endless, and some of them I could continue to do while being a faculty member, or if I wanted to leave the academy, which I don't think I will be doing at all. But with my PhD in school psychology and PhD in psychology in general, I'm also a board certified behavior analyst. So that's another credential that I have. I'm also working toward becoming a licensed psychologist. So with those credentials, I could work in a hospital, I could work in a clinic supporting children with autism or developmental disabilities or feeding issues or lots of other issues. I could, once I get my license as a psychologist, I could start my own clinic if I wanted to do so. I could also consult with school districts. I could be a school psychologist in school districts, or be a director of special education, or those types of things. I could also work at state departments of education, um, like for example, Ohio Department of Education. They have lots of positions there, or I could be doing trainings or supporting schools or making decisions at the state level. So there's a variety of different things that I could be doing from a clinical perspective, working in schools, working from a policy perspective at state levels or at district levels, et cetera.
At what point did you get that certification?
I got the BCBA in last year, 2019.
What's that acronym?
It's a board certified behavior analyst. So it's specifically looking at behavior analysis. So a lot of it has to do with supporting children with developmental disabilities and emotional behavioral disorders. So a lot of the behavioral foundations that you can use for supporting children and families.
Does that come with a pay bump?
Not in the world of academia, but if I were in a clinic or a hospital, it would, yeah, and it would make me more competitive for those positions as well.
Okay. Also, you mentioned, and I don't think, even though I got my doctorate in it, I did not. I'm tripping. Even though I got my bachelor's in it, stay in your lane, young man. I definitely didn't even think about the process of becoming a licensed psychologist. And I say that because I think even till you said it out loud, I worked in social work and I know the importance of getting licenses, and each license allows you to do and be prepared to do whatever specific thing that you're trying to do. With that though, I don't think I ever thought about that. So I just graduated with my doctorate in sexual behaviors. I think I had a class like that or something like that. But I just graduated in something like that. All right, so I just graduated with my doctorate in some type of psychology, right?
Yeah.
How do I allow myself to be a practitioner that is licensed?
Sure. So there are lots of different credentials and licenses. So in terms of being a school psychologist, there's actually a credential at the state level to become a school psychologist, and you have to take a test called the Praxis and demonstrate that you've completed the requirements of a graduate program that's approved and accredited and all that stuff. And that's relatively easy to do, and you can walk out of the program with that. In terms of getting your license as a psychologist or your LP, you have to complete additional postdoctoral hours. So you have to, and it depends on how many hours you count you're able to count during your program. But you have to complete more hours under the supervision of a licensed psychologist, and you have to take an exam called the EPPP, the examination for the preparation of professional psychologists, I think is what it's called. So it's kind of the equivalent of the bar exam for psychology. So you have to get your hours and then take your EPPP, and then you become a licensed psychologist. And then from then on, with any of the credentials, you have to do kind of continuing education credits afterwards to maintain your licenses and your credentials. So that's part of the reason why people oftentimes do a postdoc, which could be like a year or 2 years after the PhD in psychology, so that you can have that time to gather those supervised hours and take that exam. So then you walk out of the postdoc, which is also a paid position. You walk out of the postdoc with both your doctorate and your license as a psychologist, and then you can go forth and do great things. So the way that I did it was I started my career and started to accrue those hours toward my BCBA, and then eventually my license as a psychologist, which I will be getting shortly. I started to accrue those hours while doing my full-time job as a faculty member, which is a very interesting thing to do. So you have to really kind of figure out and find time to do those hours rather than taking a year to get those hours done and get the license during that year.
Man, I'm gonna be honest with you. It sounds like you don't ever stop having to get some new degree. I mean, the learning, of course, never stops. I know that part, but the constant need for more education is a whole different conversation than constantly learning. Because education is a formal process. Learning can take place in any moment. That's right. And usually education means that you probably charge.
Right. So yeah, that's what the continuing education is, right? So you have to either go to conferences. Now there are a lot of online and kind of virtual things that you can jump into. So things around ethics, things around different topics within your field. You have to complete those continuing education credits so that you can keep your license in lots of different situations. The BCBA credential that I have is really good because a lot of the work that I already do counts for continuing education. So for me, teaching classes on behavior analysis gives me a lot of my continuing education credits, which is awesome because I'm already doing that. So that's really helpful, but I just have to get like the ethics credit hours there. So I can do that at a conference or jump onto some kind of online seminar that's approved and those types of things.
Okay, so we're talking about all these credentials, and you mentioned it subtly. How important is the university that you graduate from?
So yes, so it is important, and it really depends on the field that you're in and the graduate program that you choose. So really choosing that graduate program is a huge deal in terms of making sure you're choosing a program that will fit your career goals and prepare you for your career goals. So it's one of the things I really emphasize when folks are applying to graduate programs is that you really clearly articulate what your career goals. First off, think about what those are, make sure you have clear career goals, and then articulate in those cover letters how your program that you're applying to will support those goals and help you to achieve them. In terms of kind of prestige, it really depends on the field because programs at certain universities in certain fields are more highly regarded than programs in other fields. So there's definitely those types of things, but also who you work with is a big deal as well. So who your mentors are and who the people are who are going to write those letters for you and who you publish with and work with are in many cases more important than the actual program. And it's more about kind of having their stamp of approval in terms of writing letters for you and those types of things in a variety of different fields.
Okay. Do me a favor, you mentioned it already, and tell me a little bit more about the whole mentorship and more importantly, how mentors have impacted you and maybe assisted you in the process of getting to where you are.
Sure, that's great. So, in psychology graduate programs specifically, there are usually a couple different types of mentoring models. So, one model is the model that we had at LSU, which is kind of the more traditional model of you apply to work with a faculty member and you are their student, right? You are admitted under them, you're on their team, you're their student for your entire time during graduate school. The model that we use at UC in my program is more of a cohort-based model where students do not pick a faculty member to work with immediately upon admission to the program, but they're admitted as a cohort. They get to work with different faculty, and then we make that decision about who they work with in terms of their research later on in like the end of the second year in the program. But my program at LSU, I was admitted under a faculty member, and he was there for my first 2 years in the program. He ended up leaving and going to a different university. And so then I was kind of absorbed onto a different team and worked with a different faculty member during that process. So that's one of the things that can happen when faculty switch different universities or go to a different job. The students can kind of sometimes be in the middle where they're like, how do who do I work with now? I came here to work with you. Do I leave to go with you? Do I stay here? Do I work with somebody else? And that can really kind of affect students as they're kind of going through the program. So for me, it actually ended up being a great opportunity because I worked with my first advisor for those first 2 years. And when I started graduate school, I actually never had a Black male faculty member. I still have not ever been taught a class by a Black male outside of like fifth grade. So I never thought of a faculty position as something that was attainable for me. I never considered that as an option. I wanted to go back to New Orleans and work in schools and do great things within the public school system in New Orleans. So my first couple months of graduate school working with my advisor and my mentor, it was myself and another student who started together on his team. And he told us both, like from day one, you're both going to be faculty members. And he groomed us to be faculty members, and he taught us everything we needed to know, or at least everything he knew at that point. And we're both now tenured faculty members. The other one is at South Florida now. So it was one of those issues of somebody showing you something that you didn't even know was possible for you, but kind of grooming you in that way. So then when he ended up leaving, I still work with him to this day. We still maintain a great relationship. He's still a great mentor, but now I'm absorbed onto another team, and now I'm getting a different type of mentoring relationship and getting more experience under another person. So it was really actually helpful to have two different mentors for me, although it was pretty traumatic during graduate school when your mentor leaves. But it ended up working out that I ended up with two different advisors and two different mentors throughout that process.
So do me a favor and tell me more about one of the concerns that I see as a issue in moving through the ranks and having your research respected, which is depending on how young you are and how old the person is that did the original research that you may be rebutting, and how that can affect your actual research that you're doing and who sees it and how they see it. Can you speak on that? Because that is one of the number one concerns, as I said, when it came to doing research and just thinking about even going ahead and get my doctorate, because it was just so much tape. And all I could think was people are pushing against this because you spent 40, 60 some odd years of your life to this one thing. And now we're saying, hey, you said numbers don't lie. And we're proving that your quantitative data can and does tell lies based off of the way that you do it. So qualitative information is very important to be included, or for some research is the best option to be provided. So speak on that for me, because I know some people may have heard about this, or this is going to be something that they're going to have to be prepared for as well.
Sure. So part of the process in terms of producing research is you have to be open to rejection and you have to be open to being super vulnerable, to spend lots of time and lots of resources writing something that then has to be judged by somebody else. And somebody else has to find value in what you're writing about. And in many cases, when you bump into those issues of writing about Black kids and people don't care about that, or using qualitative methodology, I use single case methodology, which is similar in that it's not viewed oftentimes as rigorous as a quantitative study or like a randomized trial and those kinds of things, but you're asking different questions that are more appropriate for different types of methodologies. So you can definitely run into those issues. One of the things I would say is to have a very strong theoretical foundation for why you're doing what you're doing, and being willing and ready to defend what you're doing and why you're doing it. The second piece is to find the appropriate outlets for that work and make sure that you are doing work that is methodologically defensible and really strong, so that it can go into the top journals in your field, for example, and that you have a strong theoretical foundation to defend it. So I would say, because there are different issues when you're in graduate school as well, because you don't have the doctorate yet, you don't have that respect yet, you're just a student kind of thing. So you really have to lean on the theory and find really strong research to support what you're doing. Once you're out and once you are a scholar, it's really about finding the right outlets for your work, and then being a part of making those changes, right? So as you said, like you're, suggesting and pushing, systemic change in different fields. I'm in the similar boat where I'm like pushing a social justice agenda for how we serve children and families in schools. And that goes against everything that people have done for decades, right? And it directly impacts them, because it says that what you do and how you do it and the policies that you set up don't work. And
It
it
ain't
worked for me.
personal.
It worked for my kids. Why don't it work for their kids, right? So it's you have to recognize that you are fighting against systems that have so much, so many winds behind them and so much power and all those kind of things supporting it. So really thinking about, reading books and taking classes on systems change and on adult behavior change, and how do I get folks to see things in a different way, and how do I say things in ways that they can receive it, but also that aren't so watered down that there's no message in it either. So it's really working through all of those things to try to affect change in a way that makes sense in general.
Yeah, and see, that's where people just have to recognize that, I mean, everything that you did in your past came with the understanding that that was the times. Mm-hmm. And frankly, just because it was right then doesn't mean it was always the only option. It was just the only option available at the time. And when it comes to your passion and what you're bringing to the table, personally, it's one of those situations where, hey, if you shake up the water enough, then regardless of how much they push against it, they're all going to hear you. And it may just catapult you to the front of the line, even if you're ready or not, because now people are like, hold on, what's this new cutting edge way of thinking? We have to learn if this thing is true, because everyone's looking for the new and the latest thing, because what they've been doing may not have been done the best, because they may not have been doing the best practitioner error, or maybe they've been waiting for you to show up with this new thing, because it is what was missing in the research the whole time.
Exactly. But I would say you can't be all style and no substance, right? So make sure that you have a strong theoretical foundation for what you're doing, and that is defensible, and that you're not just popping off for no reason, but that you have clear, a clear substance for what you're doing, and that it makes sense, and that you can move forward with that. I think that is absolutely perfect.
That's called choosing your battles wisely, because if you do get pushed to the front and all of a sudden you're clearly unqualified to have this conversation.
That's right.
Maybe you should have spoke a little softer until you were ready to speak up.
Or collected more data right before you jumped into something. So like I'm in a position where there are legit about a dozen Black male faculty members in school psychology in the country. In the country, about a dozen, right? There are about a dozen of us. I know everybody. We all know each other. We see each other at conferences. There's about 12 of us. That's it. Black males in my in the entire country, in programs, about a dozen.
Wow.
Period. Right. So we have to make sure that everything that I say and do, because it is going to have eyes on it, right, is super defensible and super methodologically strong, right? It has to be really high quality. So what I'm saying is you can oftentimes be a unicorn in your field. You have to make sure that you're a high quality unicorn and not just a flashy unicorn that really has no substance, that has nothing behind what you're doing, but you're just kind of running to different opportunities. You really have to make sure you have a strong theoretical foundation for what you're doing, and what it's and how it's influencing your practice or your research or whatever you're doing in the field.
Okay. So you talked about having done a dissertation. How many pages was that?
Oof, I don't remember. I should probably know that, right? I don't remember how many it was.
Was it over 100 plus?
It was over 100, I believe, yes.
Okay. How many, do you know how many journals you've been in?
I know that I'm I think I'm at 32 peer-reviewed publications at this point. My second book is coming out in January, which is super dope. It's on peer-mediated interventions, which is exciting. My first book was on technology adaptations in school psychology. I did it with some colleagues. The second book is coming out in the spring. Done a bunch of publications, but I think I'm at 32 peer-reviewed publications at the moment.
What were the books called? Well, what was the book called, and what is the book going to be called, if you have a name for it yet?
Yes, so the book coming out in January is called Peer-Mediated Interventions, a guide to implementing peers as change agents, a guide to implementing peer-mediated interventions in schools. And that's coming out in January. The previous book was called Technology. It's on my.
You're killing me, bro.
Can I get it real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I can't remember the name. Applications. That's what it is.
Bring it over here.
There we go. Here is the first book, Technology Applications in School Psychology, Consultation, Supervision, and Training.
Okay. So it's interesting. Great minds think differently, but we understand the way others think at the same time. And the reason I said that was because that's what I was setting you up for. I was getting ready to start talking about the books, and then the actual book that I was looking for is the book that's on its way. So that's like perfect time. And I asked the question, I'm like, I don't see the book that really should be in existence. This guy did over 100 pages. That's why I asked about the dissertation. This guy's done over 100 pages with his dissertation, and I am certain he has many articles written related to similar things he wrote in his dissertation based off of new data that he's collected. Where's the book out here? Like, where's the book? And I guess it's on its way. How long we got to wait to get that?
So it should be coming out in January. We just did the final proofs and everything with the publisher, which is great. And it actually covers the whole realm of peer-mediated intervention. So we had great researchers. We reached out to a bunch of people, and everybody said yes, which was awesome, to contribute chapters to it. So it's an edited volume looking at peer-mediated interventions. There's a section for academic interventions like peer tutoring and cooperative learning and those types of things. There's a section on peer-mediated behavioral interventions like my dissertation with check and check out and peer modeling. Then there's a section at the end on peer-mediated group supports, like group contingencies, and then restorative justice interventions and kind of general school policies that involve peers. policies and practices that involve peers a lot more. So I'm very super proud of that book. It's going to be coming out in January.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Do me a favor, and for our audience, since I did mention at some point that you do have your tenure, can you explain what tenure means? And does it mean that, oh, because you've been around long enough now, you can't be fired and you can say whatever you want to say to me in class?
That is not what it means. Although there are some protections that come with tenure. The way that I describe it is when you're pre-tenure, the university is dating you. And when you get tenure, they marry you, right? So when you're pre-tenure, you come in as an assistant professor and you're on a renewable contract. So for example, when I came in, I had a 3-year contract. And during year 2, I went up for what's called reappointment. So my entire career was evaluated, and they decided whether they were going to keep me on or let me go, right? So when you're hired as a faculty member, you have very little job security in that every couple of years, you get reevaluated to determine if they're going to keep you around. When you get tenure, you're no longer on that renewable contract. Your contract is a lot more stable, and you aren't reviewed every couple of years. Although there your annual reviews and things, you don't have the issue of, are they going to let me go in the next couple of years? That's one of the things, especially being a Black faculty member or faculty member with other minoritized identities. There is this idea of not being able to speak up as much as you might want to when you're pre-tenure, because people could find ways to deny you tenure or to not reappoint your contract, or get rid of you in some ways. Whereas there's kind of more of that protection after tenure, where you might feel more emboldened to kind of speak up and make more changes and do those types of things after tenure. But you also have to recognize you're still a person with minoritized identities in these spaces, and there's still more promotions and more things that you're looking for. So you definitely kind of have to navigate those systems. But yeah, that's the overall deal, is that before you have tenure, you are dating the university. Once you get tenure, they are married to you. They say, yes, you're good to go, and you're good to go to stay here forever. We're not going to go through this reappointment process of looking at your file every couple of years to determine if you can stay.
Okay. So I'm going to call myself out right now and allow you to check everyone like myself who refers to this degree as a nothing degree. Okay. If you want to check us, because, and I got the term from, oh my goodness, I actually remember her name, but I ain't gonna throw under the bus. A friend, when I actually, wow, it's wild that she was the person during my orientation the summer I came into UC. So a peer, she said, I told her what degree I was getting. My mother was standing right there. She was right there. And you said this to me. She was like, I said, I'm gonna get my degree. I'm gonna get my bachelor's in psychology. And she's like, oh, you're majoring in a nothing degree. I was like, what? I'm like I had never heard that. And that thing hit hard when she said that. And then I graduated and I understood. So if you want to, feel free to respond, because I've said in many interviews at this point that I have a nothing degree that I did end up figuring out how to make money off of and make something of. I do want to be clear. I worked in the field where psychology was important. I worked in the field where sociology was important, and everything that I learned was actually utilized throughout that time period, which is difficult. Which is why I call it a nothing, and I agree when she called it a nothing degree unless you get your doctorate. So what's your thoughts on that?
So 2 things. One is different fields are viewed very differently. And a lot of that is based in kind of white supremacist values of what is valued and what's not valued. So hard science is valued more than soft science or social sciences in general, or like chemistry is more important than art, right? And in lots of people's ideas of what's valued and what's not valued. So I think that's part of the issue there. The other piece is you can't really do much with a psych undergrad degree, right? Can't do much with a bachelor's in psychology, as you know very well, right? So you have to either decide to get more experience in the field or go to graduate school if you're going to do that. So when I switched to psychology, 100% to go to graduate school. It wasn't, I'm going to get this bachelor's in psych and then figure it out from there. I think a lot of times when undergraduates pick psychology or switch to psychology, they may not have very clear goals about what they want to do afterwards. And so it can become a nothing degree if you end up doing something completely different because psychology wasn't consistent with what your eventual career goals are, which is totally fine, right? It's totally fine to figure out what you want to do and kind of explore different things and go from there. But I think that's why it may be considered a nothing degree. One, because of kind of like the white supremacist values of what's important or what's valued, but also because if you're going to do anything with a psychology degree, you have to continue your education. You have to get a master's, you have to get a bachelor, or you have to get a doctorate in order to actually work in the field with a psychology degree.
Okay, so I'm going to ask an odd question, and it will make sense after I ask an odd question. So, is it true that Black people and Africans have smaller brains inside of our skulls?
Absolutely not.
I'm
So
gonna call out Pena, the billionaire Pena. He decided to go on a rant and talk about how Africans have small brains. I'm like, oh my God, we're still doing this. But I wanted to come out of your mouth because you're the doctorate. And I'm just another person. So I wanted you to say it. Go ahead and finish what you were thinking. You're about to say that.
yes. So the field of psychology has a terribly racist history of white men doing lots of research to demonstrate differences between genders and races and lots of other things, and creating assessments and tests and things to demonstrate these differences that have actually zero basis in fact or anything. So there's a lot of work. There was a huge area called eugenics where people were looking at things like the sizes of brains and humps and things on people's brains and finding random areas to talk about differences between different races and all those types of things. Absolutely, completely untrue. And a lot of that work informed the intelligence testing that we still unfortunately do today, and a lot of the really racist theories that have kind of pervaded the field of psychology in general.
So tell me this though. Tell me this. That's why I asked, and then you went ahead and spoke about all of that history because I know that history. Mm-hmm. But yet you said that it's the major and the degree is valued lower because of white supremacy. And I know people heard it. People hear the term white supremacy, and that can be an immediate trigger word for shutting off people's ability to hear what's being said and whatever. Can you explain what you meant by that?
What I mean is kind of the historical systems that are in place and the historical systems that are still currently in place. So
that was created by a lot of people who believed a lot of racial bias type of thing.
Absolutely. So, for example, the University of Cincinnati was founded through the will of Charles McMicken, who wrote in his will that the university or the college at that point should be created for white students to learn, right? So this is the land that we're standing on and that I work at on a daily basis, right?
That's the school I graduated from.
What'd you say?
That's the school I graduated from.
That's the school you graduated from, right? So that has a legacy that is still felt to this day. So who receives opportunities? Who decides what is professional or what's not professional? Who are the editors of our professional journals? Who are the folks who are valuing people's research and deciding how much it's valued or not valued? Who are the people who are looking at grants and making decisions about which grants are going to be funded or not funded, right? So these are legacies of oppression that still exist to this day and are still perpetuated to this day. And so it requires a different focus, and it requires folks to dismantle those systems in order for things to be more equitable. So for example, something that's kind of completely based on white supremacy, as we were just talking about, intelligence testing, right? We know that
Yep.
Black kids, poor kids, brown kids, Latinx kids, right, score lower on intelligence tests than white kids writ large, right? And that has everything to do with the way the tests have been written, the theories on which they are derived, the way they're written, the types of questions that are asked, cultural differences, all those types of things, as well as the opportunities and experiences of the students taking those exams. So we're making decisions about whether students have disabilities or not, and whether they get access to services or not, and lots of different things. We're putting labels on kids when it's much more about the zip code that they lived in and the school that they went to and the teachers that they had and the parental support that they had and all those types of things, much more about their environment than about the person themselves. But this legacy of white supremacy tells us we have to give the kid a label or not in order for them to receive services. And it's based on a test that we know is not relevant for them and not appropriate to give them, right? So you have people giving kids tests in languages that they don't even know, right? So you're giving a kid a test in English and he doesn't know English. How is that a valid assessment of his skills in anything, right? So a lot of these things are continuing to happen. And a lot of times people don't recognize those histories and legacies of white supremacy that still exist to this day and affect policies and practices that people engage in on a daily basis.
And when you're saying white supremacy, and when you're saying white supremacy, just for our audience who continue to hear it in such a negative way, you're essentially saying that whatever is connected to the white supremacist statement is essentially favoring that person who is white, and those under as anything less and potentially not as significant, and may not favor them in the research or in the way that the information is provided. The other part, since you mentioned it, you got me really going down, and we coming to a close here. So get ready, because usually we drag this part out, but we can make this quick. So I'm gonna tell to you in advance so you can think about it, which is get ready to answer the question of the starting salary of your position and the final salary, because that's probably, we're gonna have to cut into that, make that real quick. Now, with that being said, I found the book, one of my favorite books right now. I read this probably twice, and I'm going to be on my third time over the summer. It's called Willpower Doesn't Exist, as a person who believes in willing himself through anything. It's very interesting having read this book, and some of the stuff, I take the actual book off so it doesn't mess up my cover, but it'll sit on my table. And in this book, he mentions epigenetics. How well do you understand epigenetics, and what are your thoughts on epigenetics? He also goes into the Pygmalion effect, and those two things can be easily, like, I mean, it can work multiple ways. I got ready to talk to somebody about epigenetics and how in the mice, certain trauma occurred and it maintained throughout the actual child that never experienced the trauma. And you can see some of those traumatic experiences that we're still taking on from, and when people talk about PTSD, you know, Dr. Guru, oh my goodness, Joy Guru, no, ISIS Papers. I'm so sorry, I forgot her name. Dr. Frances Cress Wilson, but I am talking about Dr. DeGruy. Dr. DeGruy, I realize that's a whole different thing. So Dr. DeGruy, she talked about post-traumatic slave syndrome. And in that, we're also talking about just the fact that, hey, these health issues, we were given the worst food. So yeah, we are more susceptible to these diseases in our community because it was passed down. The trauma that we don't even know we have, our reactions to things that we say happen from us growing up, potentially could have came from deeper issues. Now, for this exact same thing, I know how dangerous this conversation can be, because this is a conversation that can be manipulated into saying, see, this is why they are now trained to be inferior race and to be an inferior race and group of people. So what are your thoughts on epigenetics? And if you don't mind, you can give a little bit more information if you want to about what epigenetics is and the Pygmalion effect.
Yes. So in the church, we would call that generational curses, right? So things that are kind of passed down among generations of people, where, 6 generations later, you didn't experience something, but your life, your behavior is still affected by something that happened a long time ago. So I think part of it is absolutely the individual and kind of cultural transmission of certain things. So things like foods, things like music, things like all those types of things, which can be great in terms of transmitting those within families and within cultures, but that also intersects with structural issues that happen as well. So again, thinking about things around like diabetes, high blood pressure, food types things, that also intersects with things like food deserts, right? Where folks don't have access to fresh fruits and other types of things. There also might be a lack of knowledge about those types of things and issues around that as well. So I think those things really intersect to change how people interact long term. So really thinking about those traditions and cultural things that are passed on via generations, but then also the continuing effects of white supremacy, as we're talking about, that intersect with those traditions to then continue them so that people continue to engage in those same types of things. So again, with white supremacy, it's going to either oppress other groups or marginalize them so that they are othered, right? So even the language that we use in schools and in lots of situations can be really problematic, right? So we call people culturally and linguistically diverse, right? That's been a term like CLD students, culturally and linguistically diverse, which simply means that you're not white and you don't speak English, right? So it's again centering whiteness and English speaking as normal, and everybody else is other, right? And so the language that we use oftentimes can reflect those kind of legacies of white supremacy that exist and that continue to exist. Hopefully that answers your question in terms of kind of the cultural transmission of both things that are positive and negative, or things that are helpful and not helpful, as well as the legacies of systemic oppression and marginalization that also interact with those things to continue those kind of negative cycles of behaviors and cultures and things.
So you've brought up the term intersectionality several times, and I would love, especially after what you just said, for you to explain it to our audience exactly what that is and what that means.
Yes, so intersectionality is a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, amazing Black female scholar, where it really talks about two things. And oftentimes we only talk about the first part, which is that we all have different identities that intersect to form who we are, right? So if you think about your race, your gender, your marital status, your physical ability, where you're from, your occupation, all those different identities, your religion, your sexuality, all those things, right, intersect to form Mario, who Mario is, and how you show up in different spaces. The second part of that is each of those identities is exposed potentially to systemic oppression and marginalization. So it's not just that we all have different identities that intersect, but it's also that we experience marginalization and oppression in ways that intersect with those identities. So it really kind of started with Black women at General Motors in Michigan, where they were the last ones to be hired. So GM hired Black men forever or not forever, but for a while, for generations to work in the plant. They hired white women to work in the administrative positions, right? Then eventually, affirmative action, they start hiring Black women. But then there are layoffs, right? There's huge budget issues, there are layoffs, and they did it by seniority. And so what the Black women said, and they had a whole lawsuit, it was a whole deal. They said, that this is problematic and we are being oppressed because and discriminated against because this seniority clause on who was fired first is based on the last people hired, and we didn't have access to this job before other people. And so GM is like, what are you talking about? We've hired Black people forever. We've hired women forever. What are you talking about, right? And this is where intersectionality comes in. The Black women said, it's not that I'm Black. It's not that I'm a woman. It's that I am both Black and woman. Those things are intersecting. And that is what's causing me to experience this discrimination in this setting. And, that kind of continued there. And that kind of led to this work on intersectionality, which has kind of, there's been a lot of work on that more recently. But that's kind of the basis of it, is that it's not just that people have different identities, but that those identities are exposed to various types of marginalization and oppression and systems in the world.
Okay. So with respect for time, go ahead, because we can keep doing this. This is really fun, and I'm gonna just respect time and say, go ahead and give our audience the salary. What's the starting salary? What's the potential pay salary, and specifically for your positions?
Sure. So, of course, with many positions, it can vary widely. So, as a faculty member, a lot of it is really based on the location that you're in. So, if you are a faculty member in Knoxville, Tennessee versus New York City, right, you're going to have very different levels of pay due to the area that you're in, et cetera. So, I would say kind of like middle of the road, beginning salary in terms of psychology specifically would be around like 55 to 65,000. And then from there, and that's kind of base salary, and it's also for 9 months. So you're typically on a 9-month contract versus a 12-month contract. And so you can write grants and do contracts and do lots of other things to supplement your salary in that way. The max salary, I would say, for a typical faculty member, in terms of your base salary, 120, 150 maybe once you're at that level. If you go into being a dean or go into another provost level administrative position, you can be in the 200s, the 300s, and even higher from there. And you can also do a lot of work that would supplement your salary. Another thing to think about as well is the field that you're in. So different fields pay very differently in terms of salary. So like, 55, 65 might be a starting salary for psychology, whereas in business, it might be 100, 105, right? To be a starting salary, or engineering might be high, right? So it depends on the field that you're in and the position that you have. Also, tenure track positions are typically going to pay more than teaching positions or educator track positions, not always, but that may be different. And then the type of university that you're at will matter as well. So if you're at a very high research activity university, you might be paid more than if you're at a university that doesn't have as much research activity. So your location matters, your field matters, the type of position you're in, and the type of university that you're in as well. The good thing, however, is you can look up people's salaries. So when you're at a public institution, you can search for folks on the state websites. So it's a good idea when you're negotiating salary, when you're at the point of working with the dean or the department chair or whoever to figure out your contract and negotiate, you can look up people who have recently been hired and see how much they're being paid to make sure that you're paid equitably and all those types of things.
Okay, that's great. That's great. You got anything you want to leave our audience with today?
I would say being a faculty member is possible. It's absolutely possible. Being a researcher is amazing. I love the freedom that you have as a faculty member. So you don't have to clock in and clock out, right? You get your work done whenever is best for you. So I'm not a morning person. I like the afternoons. So I get a lot of work done in the afternoons, but I know folks who wake up at 4 in the morning, get a lot of work done, and they're on the golf course by noon or by 2 o'clock and doing their thing, right? So you really have to have that determination and discipline to get things done, because as a faculty member, you're evaluated on products. You're not evaluated on time. It's not about being on the clock at certain times. It's about producing things that people find value in. And so it can be a very stressful situation, but you can also do amazing things. I also do a lot, I'll say as well, in terms of being a Black faculty member, I do a lot in terms of recruiting and retaining Black students and other students of color in my program. I have a research team with my Black students where we're doing research on Black kids, and I'm kind of directly supporting them and working with them. And so that's a lot of that and kind of more hard work that you can do as well as a faculty member, where you can support kids and support students who look like you, and be the Black faculty member that I never had as I went through undergrad and graduate school. And so it's a really awesome job. I absolutely love it. Going back to how we started, absolutely love my job. I'm doing great work in terms of pushing my field forward in terms of social justice, but also pushing my program forward and supporting especially my minoritized graduate students and seeing them go on to do amazing things. So one of our fraternity brothers, Kamante Heidelberg, now Dr. Kamante Heidelberg, was my student and my advisee, and he's now a faculty member at the University at Buffalo, right? So those are the legacies that you can really build and create as a faculty member, and specifically as a Black faculty member in lots of different fields.
Okay, man, that's excellent, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate your time. I want to say this. What did I take away from today and what I got from you is I know I stress and my audience knows I love talking about who knows you, not just who you know, but you really brought it back to the origin of what you know. You need to be on your game. Like, don't just show up and try to be something that you're not without being prepared, without being very well researched and having the level of understanding that you need in order to gain the respect, as well as have to go to bat for whatever it is that you're trying to state as the new research that people need to take seriously. So respect that, respect the art, respect the work, and also be passionate and be willing to fight for that which you believe in order for your research to be respected, because obviously you have proven and have taken your lumps to be in that room, regardless of what history and research has shown. You can be included if you've done your work to be that. And also, you talked about who you know, which is those 12 people out there in your industry. And I'm sure you all talk, as you mentioned, and that allows you all to stay sharp, allows you all to always stay on your A game and maybe even console each other. But that's a conversation for a different day, because I think there's so much more we could talk about. And man, I really appreciate this. I think I hope my audience got something from it. I am certain that at the end of the day, if somebody decides to take on this role, they're not going to be surprised by anything. And if they are, they think they may be, send me a comment and maybe we can get them back on to have another discussion to fill those little holes in. Yeah, but thank you for your time. I appreciate you. And I'm going to greet you and salute you the way that I can only with my brothers, which is go mob.
Go mob, sir. Thank you.
Ooh, Jesus.
I did a lot of work.